Well, hopefully we don't get kicked off. The stream ended up getting like partially kicked off on the first one, so I just stayed quiet.
Was that because you were swearing?
No, it's because of music.
So how does that work?
How does it work?
Well,
What do you mean?
so you can't go live on Facebook with music in the background?
No, it's copyright. Which is understandable, but a lot of balls.
What about when people go live, like when they're out
They
clubbing or
don't
something?
care about that, do they?
Oh, yes, but yeah.
I don't get it, really don't. Adam Myerscough looking for a car park. That'll do.
I'll have time to park out back of Berlin's there, right opposite. What used to be Berlin's.
Well, they're putting football on, come on. What's he trying to do? Does he know what? It's not.
He didn't look full of sense downstairs like that bad, does he?
No, don't go over to it and press on it, you donut. It's gonna fucking. There you go, yep. One below it, one before. Oh my dear, what are you doing?
Well, hang on, that's not England game anyway, was it? That was Lithuania or something.
It's. Wait, what? When's England playing?
5 o'clock.
What channel's it on? Is it on Sky?
Home qualifiers tend to be on ITV, don't they?
Is it? England football on TV. Let's have a look. England.
It's not on Sky, yeah.
Oh, it's on ITV, yeah.
Go and tell him it's ITV.
Go on, Ash. Just
He's
tell
looking on Sky.
Geezer downstairs it's on ITV.
He's gone for every Sky channel, he doesn't know it's ITV.
Poor lad.
103.
Yeah. Rack and roll, I've got it.
You don't have your own works number in your phone?
Yeah.
How do you ring in sick? It's a man on speed dial. Not today, pal.
Do you want me just to message you? Oh, you. Oh.
I might take him forever
Here
to read a
then.
message.
Yeah. I was gonna say get me a. Oh well, it's here and all, but not idea.
Never mind that, we've got a game on.
Got a game on and he's still flicking through TV guide trying to find where it is. He's just giving up.
There we go.
Yeah. Whoop whoop.
Oh, look at Shane.
I hope. Watermelon's out in cricket. Go on, lad. Go on. Hey, 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 hey.
It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? Well, that's a highlighted day, isn't it?
Hey. Oh.
Looks like John's about to take first for him.
He does well, so.
Or maybe not. It's a strange one.
He's still in it.
It's landed nice, yeah. I don't know. Tell.
11.
11 so far. 11 just started. 8. They must have heard you.
Hang on.
He's just scared at middle pocket here. Oh, John's Reds, that's why. That makes sense. Oh, John. Looks like he left an edge there, but he hasn't. Oh, he has. He did leave an edge.
Wait, didn't.
No shot shit.
Yeah, I was wondering why you look like that. Why you look like that? You look like that.
Yeah. 178. Is it? It used to be.
I still want to watch cricket.
Christian, what's that channel on TV, mate? Well, fucking Sky, you moron. What channel is it? 178. Oh, what's it say? It's the 178. Travel channel.
It used to be High TV HD.
Yeah.
Just go for the TV guide on the.
That looks
what
it.
is
Start because you don't watch it. I was like, this is fucking shit. Then I googled it. I found that hard to believe.
Is this just regular ITV? Don't know how we're going to watch it now.
Good, because the HD's and we like it's like in front, isn't it, or behind? So we'll know the score before one does.
Will Scott play?
Well, either the HD's behind or it's in front of one of the channels, isn't it? If you run it for a day.
HD's usually
Has to be
behind.
behind, surely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's usually behind.
Honestly, like, fucking
Sick of this playlist now. We've heard this long loads.
Same, yeah.
You what?
This song's been on like fourth time now.
Duran Duran on.
Yes. Who doesn't want some Duran Duran on?
I don't know, but John's has missed an absolute peach shot there.
Oh, good queuing.
I think it's just a case of just using that cue and just to play it with top and just flick it in.
I think I'll stun it across the one.
Well, you could, but
Oh,
make sure you pot it.
yeah. That's half the battle. At least we can forgive these two for a scrappy opening frame. Whereas Beasley was like this in 10th.
Looked like watching
it's not
Yogs all this morning.
That's what I mean, they were like it in 10th frame.
That was ridiculous.
He's going to play plant here. Oh, he goes to middle, does he?
Yeah, boss.
Drop it into middle again and he's back on track.
Middle, top right, middle. Tweet.
Did he?
Massive tweet. That's me head.
Sorry. He's not gone behind red. He's not gone behind red. He's not gone behind. Ooh.
No, yeah, it's alright. First frame on board. Never really seen
Don't use
Shane
that
play. Yeah, but it's not working.
No. He's a good pot with Shen.
John did put him down as brain dead Potter. So like, right, that's sound.
Shared mackerel and toast and my spring rolls last week because yesterday someone brought me some fucking cheese.
Ash, can you get us a can of Coke, please? Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry, but I've just been downstairs.
Well,
Thanks for asking for what
yeah,
you're doing.
thanks. You know, you just
What do you want? I'll get you
just can of Coke, please.
regular.
Yeah, full fat. I'm on no diet, am I? I won't be here. Yeah, that's
Good job they got some in today. They had none last night. What's that one there? Is that? Yes, please.
Mine are behind bars, so just... Mine are already behind bars, so...
You don't pay for it, so tell me what's free.
Yeah. Oops, I just like smacked them
You
on.
are? What is that?
What did you say?
Speak when spat at, will you? I want some chocolate, Ash. You're going to run to the shop and get me some chocolate?
Some chocolate now. You know what else?
I want some Cadbury's chocolate with the
Cadbury's.
bits of Dime Bar in or crunchy.
You know what?
What do you get in return? I might thank you. Well, what would you want in return? This is where you spin me into your sordid web, isn't it? Have we got the chat on? Don't start that round here, neither. You stinky vaping shite.
Oh dear.
Is there no chat at all?
Well, no one's there. Oh. Right, England are walking out for football. Time to watch some disappointment on all screens. Brilliant.
They should hammer these up today. Bloody Bulgaria. So, let's see what we're going to count. Right, so, Paul, have you been watching this for him? Who's what? I haven't put the colours on.
John's Reds.
John's Reds. You play, Sam, a little bit. Do you have a preference to what colour you are?
Colour?
Yeah, I tend to have a preference. I like putting reds more.
Really?
Yeah. Don't know why.
Are you colourblind?
No, I just...
That like a genuine question, like, cause,
Not colourblind.
'cause
No, I don't know. I seem to prefer potting reds than the others.
fair enough. Because
I wouldn't choose yellows. I wouldn't choose
dear
reds ahead of
shit.
it if it was,
Yeah.
if it's 50-50, I'll go reds
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
like potting reds. It's just, I don't know. I just seem to...
No, because it was actually something that someone did say when they were about, they were colourblind and they were like, oh yeah, this colour. I forgot which colour it is that's better for it.
But surely, wouldn't both colours still be a different colour, just a different colour?
No, because it
probably say,
depends
like,
what
purple and-
spectrum you are.
Oh, does it?
On it, yeah.
Oh, they don't see like browns and blacks or something instead.
No, depends what.
What?
Just John's just kind of gifted that one to Shane for attempt number 2.
What's it? Is this looking tuna now?
There we go. Drop. Oh, he's gonna have to. He's too bit straight on this.
Yeah, you have to
He's gonna have to like try and
force it off top cushion with a bit of side and leave it to middle.
bit of top. What will you do here?
Top
Bit of-
right.
No, because
Try and flick it into here and
I
then
don't
just
know.
get some in it.
if
If you get
top
it
right's
black,
gonna like.
pulled it back from the middle, has he?
Yeah, he's got it alright. I thought, to be fair, trying to force it into the cushion with the bitter angle that he had were better. But
It's near enough.
to say the one that he missed earlier in that frame, he's took that one well.
Yeah,
2-0.
I think I'm going to settle down now and I think this will be a good game.
Lad on table 2's just pulled off an absolute sick bucket of a black. We've got someone eating literally just blocks of cheese.
Weird, isn't she?
What is wrong with people? No biscuits are okay. Literally just
She's a heathen.
blocks of cheese and Shane's on for a dish here.
I like those.
Just drop this in and leave your centre bitter and angle to work through.
Quite yellows.
Yeah, just drop this in. Leave
I think you just
white
stop-
where
stop
that
it
yellow
dead.
is.
Yeah, you don't want to go behind black, do you?
No.
There you go.
Yeah, that run it from when
That's alright. I can just
he
pull this
jabbed
down.
it a little though, didn't he? Don't run it. You'll be alright.
It may if it goes wrong for you.
No, he
you
didn't want that queuing.
Didn't want behind black, no.
He had alt table or bottom at table to use it.
Yeah, I'd like another foot down and run off pushing for black to the middle.
Yeah. Now he's stretching and
He's a big unit.
he's snookered this one.
Yeah, total, yeah. Well,
Have a lash, black in middle. Happy days. Told you.
he's pinned it, nice shot. Shot, Shane. Oh, this could get ugly quick. We might get full John King grind mode.
No, please don't. I saw it at Hustlers a few couple of weeks ago. That was bad enough.
Oh, was that we played Grimshaw?
Who did he play now? I forgot who he played and it was just really tight.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it was Chris Grimshaw. Oh. So if you have like PRS,
Yeah.
does that mean that they won't pull your stream off?
I can get PRS, but the problem is because there's no, like, there's an infinity amount of people that can watch the online streams,
Oh, right.
so it puts the cost of PRS into like
Ah.
stupid money.
Can't they work out what's like an average?
Unfortunately, not no. Because obviously, like for a venue, it works on how many people you can get into your room, isn't it?
Yeah. Where's he going with these cans of Coke?
I don't know, man. I think he's
Oh, here he is.
look at that for timing.
Fine.
Cheers, thank you.
Cheers, Rob. Before I got lost. Thank you.
England international.
Yeah, Kate Ringe.
Yeah, she don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
Is she 7-6 up or 7-6 down?
7-6 down. Oh, is she up now?
Oh, just as you were saying that, she misses a straight black and goes in off.
Yeah, but if that black's on line, I can
You've got
see
two.
Robbo missing this.
It's 2 though.
Yeah, but still.
Shane just dish.
Yeah, soon
Yeah,
as
he
I
just
soon as I
dished,
pop
yeah.
black and come off cushion and knocked it in the middle.
No, it's not. It's simple. Like, really.
You know he had 2. He ain't going to miss out with 2. He ain't that
No, but I thought if it were on the line, I'd
Right.
expect him going,
Ah,
having
yeah,
to
you've got to
double
go
it
down,
off,
yeah.
and then it
Oh,
just
yeah.
ends up.
bad. I'll give you that one. Yeah.
See,
Yeah. These are jungle for Jowett, don't really look.
Yog comes in, Mr. Snowman, Michelin Man, should I say?
I tell you what with it.
Christian's bottled it. Arse fell out,
Yeah. Cabbage hunting a cat 5
trying to anyway.
and making hard work. of it.
Making hard work of it. Brilliant.
He needs to ask the pro cabbage hunter that is Matty Gardner.
Definitely not you after seeing how you played the other week.
Ah, yeah, that first event, that was just a setup. I want a cheap Calcutta next one.
Both, mate. Thurston's and that 3-man camp. You didn't do out in that 3-man camp up
I
here.
lost one frame all day.
Did you? Ooh.
Yeah, I won 21 out of 22 frames. I just didn't start very well.
Ooh.
It's a catchy little song, isn't it?
Well, after you've heard it about 4 times on.
Yeah, I thought you were
Makes
changing
sense.
music, Ash. Have you? What playlist is this? Well, that's what we listen to.
It's in reverse order. It's in reverse.
Just press shuffle.
Change playlist, but it's in reverse.
Fucking Billy Ray Cyrus.
Put some on. Billy Ray Cyrus. That's 80s cheese. I want 80s electro. Or synth.
You don't want a lot, do you, mate? Chocolate bar from the shop.
Are you going to the shop?
80s electro.
Oh, I don't want a lot. I'm very easy to please.
Like, look at you.
What, like Cruncher?
Cheers, man.
Block of Cruncher.
Change your attitude.
Here we go, what's Shane playing here? Covering me? No, he's come crushing to
From all I see you.
I can't hear what you're saying, Ash.
I can see John
Sorry, what colour is he? I haven't done buttons.
yellows. Partially touching the yellow.
Have the views gone up yet or not?
I'll have a look in a minute.
They shared it onto
Thought it'd be going all the way.
the Morton site where obviously John plays from.
Who are we actually playing?
Basically, they've thrown a dart at a map of the world and said, right, we're playing these today.
Should be an easy one.
Should be, but it won't be.
The odds on score 3.
2-0, I'll say. Man, shoot.
Yeah, we don't batter teams, do we?
No, we don't. Unless they're called San Marino and what's the other one?
Even then, we don't batter them. Luxembourg, them kind of teams. Andorra, we always draw Andorra.
Yeah.
Go see Billy.
Oh, is he here? Oh, he is, don't know.
You didn't get waved back from Billy. Billy don't like you.
No. I'll just pretend I was waving at the bed behind him instead then. Then I'm blanking him now when he does make eye contact with me.
Keep it real.
You'll be back soon. You'll be back soon.
Never long up. All too well, Sam.
A bit of a simple run over John. I could do one of these tables finishing soon, so I can have a bit of a knock and lose an arm off.
I fancy having a look. Pardon me. Yellow's in,
Oh, is it
white's not in.
He's still alright. Practice quite a lot with John. Little race to 15s for 20, that kind of thing. He is the luckiest man in the world.
Wait till you play me. Oh dear, and that red's drops into a minute.
Yeah, but there's a lot of work to do even.
Fair bit of work, that's truthful.
That's a good shot. Or maybe not. He's tried covering it black to the middle, but he's pumped out a little bit. Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, we all saw it.
We actually had a bet that you'd miss it. We all said yes. We all said yes.
We also, yeah. We've got proper confidence in you. Got proper confidence in you.
So what is it? 12-10.
Right, where's
It's
this
been
yellow?
mentioned that you're,
Yellow's in middle, white's off 2 cush.
Watch it.
Whoa,
I
he's
bet
brought-
it's perfect. Oh, his looks run out. Doing Shane a favour, releasing his awkward red as well.
This is it. He's gonna, whatever he does is bringing possibly both out. Ooh, where's the white? You know what? He's got the bottom red to go for.
I don't think he's even looked at it yet.
Surely he's got to play it. So then he can flick this, the red that's in the middle, as well.
I see Shane's borrowed Mount Falshaw's red trainer spot there.
Robbo, I do.
Kate must have been in front of Robbo because he's 7-0 now.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Oh, how do you like these? I think he nails this on that table. It looks good, it's there. 8-7, first to 9 to Robbo against Kate Ringe.
Very good little win that for Robbo.
Yeah. What cat would you say Kate is then?
I think got her down as cat 4.
Wow.
I'll have a look. Once John's
That's a oh, he's
missed.
I don't believe it. That's a sorry state of affairs, isn't it? It's like cat 4 at men's is England ladies.
What? Oh,
That's
right.
my bird.
I know.
We just wondering why a random lass has put a love out on Square on chat.
Right. Let's have a look, see what the... Where are categories posted?
It's on. Is it pinned on Scarborough comps?
Oh yeah, that's the one, isn't it? Scarborough comps, yeah. Right, let's have a look. No, you can't say too much now, can you? Ah!
I would like I'd say anything anyway.
Right, let's have a look, see where this pinned post is. Let's have a bit of agenda. Announcements. Oh, here we go. Here it is. Category. Right.
There's a lot of category 3, isn't there?
So I've put my son in cat 4.
She's not there.
She can't be in cat 5. She can't be in anything. I'd definitely put a cat 4.
Maybe she's in 3.
Cat 3 then.
No.
No. No then. She shouldn't play up here, does she? So.
Well,
it's
no,
like-
but yeah.
I know they were trying to just for the betting, weren't they? It's 4-0 by the way.
Yeah, so John missed a.
Sorry, he missed the one into the middle, didn't he? And then,
Yeah, it was a bad
yeah. I'm just having a look though. John King, cat 3.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you look at the cat 3, there's a lot of good players in there. Like solid players.
To be fair, look at some of right. I'm just going to say this. You look at some of the cat 3s, right? There's some there that I play very often. Likewise in the cat 4s. And there's some that are in the cat 3s that lose very often to the cat 4s
Yeah.
in competitions.
Yeah.
Don't know how they're in cat 3s. I know he's had to do this off like a bit of a...
Well, I have an issue with this category system.
Yeah, go on now.
Not in the theoretical side of it. I think it's
No.
really, really good.
Yep.
However, it's just Dan does it all, doesn't he? I know he asked a few people in there, but
Right.
I think something like this, when it's there's competitions now where you're
restricted,
certain
yeah.
cats can only enter,
Yeah,
and when it's only one guy's opinion, I think you need more of a
panel.
committee on it. Yeah, 5, 6, 7 people, and every month it's got to be looked at, and you say, you know, like, anyone on form this, you know, we need to
Yeah.
knock up one. Like, you know, it's like if you look at, just for instance, one of our mates, Frankie, he's playing really well at the moment. It's cat 5. Is it cat 5 or has he already moved him? Ignore me. He's already moved him to cat 4. But you know, he moved him up pretty quick. But there's a few of us that. What was he one? Billy. Billy's been sat in cat 5 for as long as his cats have been on. I get him in my 3-man team, and all of a sudden the week after he's cat 4 now.
Oh yeah,
And
in
like,
the 3-man
in the
team.
flick
Yeah.
and just because I wanted him in my 3-man team,
Yeah.
because I saw that he was, you know, too good for cat 5.
Yeah, there's a couple. Like when you look at someone there. Now I don't want to say names straight out on stream because that's not me. So, but the mouse cursor will tell it for you.
Yeah. I don't know him, so that's.
No, this is what I mean. And there's a couple there that I'd say would be just looking at who's in cat 4. It'd be the other way around for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just from competitions. Obviously, it might have just been where the ones where he's been able to decide on,
But
they've played well.
Yeah.
The other lads haven't.
But it's
which
tough,
happens.
yeah, and it's tough to judge though, because like if you'd only seen me, you've seen me play one really bad frame against you in that 3-man event,
Yeah, that's it.
which you said I played terribly in. But then when I tell you I won 21 out of 22
Yeah, yeah.
frames,
Which-
like, oh, maybe he did play
No,
not
yeah,
too bad in day.
but
And the first one's won, so I've probably been cat 5 on your cats,
yeah,
which I wouldn't mind.
yeah, it would be good. It's actually Cat 2. Cat 2, Adam Myers-Scott's in there, you're in there, Haribo.
They were talking last night that Max is going to get knocked into cat 1. That's all the one about last night.
Halber, yeah, that's
He played really well last night against Jowett. But my argument was like Cam, like a few months ago, before they put all like Jake Newlove and Hassan into our cats.
Cat, yep.
I was arguing that how Cam Austwick isn't a cat 1 in Scarborough. I don't know. When he's
Yep.
represented England, university.
Prior to the whole lads coming in.
Yeah. Before everyone else comes
Yeah.
in, how is an England player?
Not
my
in
argument
Cat
was,
1.
does he have to get qualified for Europe to get into Scarborough's Cat 1?
Yep, I'd agree with that, yeah.
But obviously now they've filled it out. With
It
branched
makes
out
sense
yeah,
now.
Yeah.
It's filled out.
It's got right, but
yeah.
before, I don't know, he wasn't a Cat 1.
Look, see, this is what I look at. So, Paul Ringe is Cat 1. Neil, who has just played, he's Cat 2 on
Neil
this
Brooks,
list.
Yeah.
I think it must have just been the type of game that he played then today, because to be fair, for me, for a Cat 2, he missed a
normally-
lot of chances.
He's normally quite solid, is Neil. Yeah, he got to the final of one at comps, or was it semi-final? Yes, final of one at comps
obviously,
of a week. Playing really well. And just solid.
Summit ones, he just didn't, he didn't get a chance in, and Paul, he's gonna clear him up.
I suppose everyone's allowed a bad day every now and
Yeah,
again.
that's it. Yeah, yeah.
If that's all you see of them,
definitely.
then it's tough to judge. You just kind of got to go.
Yeah.
Trust that. Thank you. Can you go down to the bank for me if I send some cash?
Put it on me.
Oh, I got some money.
I'm expecting John to probably grind a couple now. 4-0 down, race to 9. It's a bit.
Yeah, I thought.
Not all low, but you start. Your mindset then starts going into, oh no, I need to start beating him.
You start playing negative, don't you?
Yeah.
To get back in game.
Shane's only allowed another 4 frames in theory for John to still win.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's always. Where would it be?
Yeah, he's got to beat him 9-4 or better, hasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, 4 frames. Yeah. Why did I have to really count that out? Oh my god.
Yeah, counting on his fingers.
Oh yeah.
That's a good effort.
Whereas now you could start seeing Shane trying to just play a bit too relaxed.
Well, if you're not relaxed, 4-0 up first 9.
No, but you know what I mean? Just where you're a bit lackadaisical with your
gung-ho,
shots. Yeah.
If he puts it middle, he should win. Oh.
Now,
That ball could be a turning point. Because if he
massive.
gets that, I think he drops these reds in and goes 4-1. Now it should be 5-0.
Didn't have to do much with the white. If he wanted to, he could have gone off the cushion and back up.
I personally like to hit that a bit harder.
Yeah.
It's just
It's blocked its feet and it's dropped in, and this black goes into the middle with ease, so just roll this in.
I think he's just going to stun up to black blue spot, isn't he?
No, he's gone for a screw. Why has he done that?
Done that.
It goes easily enough
Yeah.
off the red.
Yeah. It's a big middle pocket, isn't it?
Yeah. Great if you can part, but still.
He's pretty strong at those cuts.
Yeah, but
But still, yeah, you'd rather leave a
yeah.
bit stronger at those straight ones in his cuts.
Seals in Cat 5 and 6. I only know a couple of them, few of them.
Rob's a good cat 5. He's playing pretty well at the moment.
So then he's getting, with the more chances you give him at the table, the more chance for him to do something.
Yeah. So, John King trailing 5 frames to 0. Do.
Is it a case of he's pretty much got to win this frame? However, hook or by crook.
He has to.
I might get a good knock on this table. If Shane went
Shane
6-4
wins
pretty quick, it's
it's
still open table.
yeah, I believe so.
What's Joe at? Oh, he's got back to 12 all. Yeah, I can see, Christian. I can see.
Still has to come over for confirmation now.
I can see.
That's 5 on bounces.
Oh, yeah. Christian's come over bragging about winning 5 in a row against the Cat 5 Cabbage.
Sick.
Well done, mate. I'm proud of you. John. He struggled last night as well, did John, against... who did he play? Kid from Whitby. Derek.
Mm.
I didn't see much at the game because I was occupied, but I think Derek played pretty well.
No, this is the type of frame per minute that I was going to go on. Was 40 minutes we've been going on for this, and it's 5-0.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't mess about him, Shane.
No. Gonna work around these yellows very nicely, I would imagine.
Looks like he's got middle bag now.
I don't know if it goes.
This one goes to middle, surely.
No, I think it's blocked. Yeah. Facial expressions.
Oh wow, maybe not. I think it goes. Maybe he's snooping on it.
It's gonna help. Yep.
Now he's got that one to middle if he wants it. Yeah. Good pot. He's very good curious, Shane. He's got a snooker table at home, so that kind of helps him.
Ah, yeah, he'll be.
He can knock them long ones in, they don't seem too long for him. Look at that. So if he knocks his down rail, if he just drops it in dead weight, this is over. Hold white, wet, yellow is.
All the talking game now, you've got to play it there. All the talking game now, but you've got to play it there.
Oh, I can talk a good game and play a mediocre one.
I hope England's on attack. England's on.
There we go. Well, there's a shock.
Fucking 94.
Is that all it was, 9-4?
Well, fucking, do you mean all it was? He won.
Well, it's easy saying that now when he's just put points, mate, yeah.
just what ball in there. It's easy to say that now, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Look at this. They're all like, what to do? There's 3.
That's why you get when goalkeepers play, passing outfield roles. Doing goal for a reason.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just his feet nice in that sense. That was when I used to play. That was my area. That 6-yard box.
Anywhere else that you could reach goal?
I once scored a hat trick. It was combined distance of 4 yards.
Yes, go on. How many goals did you nick off other people?
Oh,
by
plenty.
Well, they've gone for an absolute banger and you've just fallen.
Yeah, and I've just stuck my toe on it.
Yeah.
I've had, I think it's about 230 I scored in the local league. 50 in my pens. Strong
Just
as an
sums
ox.
up Sunday football, that, doesn't it?
Strong as an ox, so I got into box and he can fucking blow me over. Oh, I swore, sorry.
Yeah, look at this. Like, they're playing tip-tap-toe.
Oh, dear, mate. Still, he's pretty sharp, still, isn't he?
Yeah, his reactions are really good. And he's like, well, why didn't I just kick it out?
But I don't get it. They've changed the rule now so you can pass it in your box from a goal kick. Which is good for teams like Man City that play that kind of way.
Yeah, but everyone's trying to play like that.
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean say you have to.
No.
John's got Shane tied up here. Surely the way out of that was going one cushion and try and get the one to the middle.
Yeah.
Because even if he gets this one, he's
He's
going
gonna
to
be
run into
snookered,
traffic and
yeah.
snooker, yeah.
This is where I reckon John will be tying him up again.
Yeah, this is John's game now. I don't mean this frame. I mean, this is this is how he wants little tactical frames. Well, that yellow's still not exactly in a bad place, is it?
No, it's got the 2 reds on the left aren't hard, but they're not in like ploppable positions.
No,
are they?
it's not somewhere where you can just play snooker and develop one at the same time, is it? He must feel he has no choice but to put this ball in that pocket now. Because that was obviously a good block of that black. That was
Yeah.
one at main pockets for black to start going there, wasn't it? That's worked out well. I tell you, luckiest man in England. Even though it's 5-0 down. Is that handball? Oh, okay. The penalty.
Just allow John another chance here just to.
I wonder why Christian hasn't come over and told us score.
Is it behind?
Christian! Christian! What score? To you? You didn't come and tell us.
You know what he said to me earlier? Because he's not getting past 11.
Did you mean him or his opponent?
You know if Christian loses this.
Oh, I tell you what, he's just. Oh, no, you're kidding me. Well, Christian's got the red tight on top rail, and the guy just played the shot to land him perfectly on it. That was awful. He could have done anything in the world there. And angled to get blackout. Oh, he's missed it though.
Is that sort of messed up?
Get behind that yellow. Get behind that yellow. Oh, he's snooping himself. Oh. Well, we're not talking about the game we're watching.
Well, John's got ball in hand here.
Oh, I see Robbo's 8-all with Kate and they've shook hands. I don't know who won. I didn't see it. Did
Christian's
Robbo
given
win?
up.
Did Robbo win? Did Robbo win? Does he look happy? I can't quite tell.
Never looks happy.
Oh, well, has it? Oh, he's just bumped into Sam Locke as he was on the shot, and I don't know if he's moved something. No.
No, he must not have done, but still to bump.
He really wasn't. Well, he bumps. When the table's this close, you get that, don't you?
Yeah. No, I think John could possibly. He's leaving this plant and it's dangerous to leave this fast.
He's got to get top side of it, hasn't he? I think, and take the pocket one first. Looks like Jowett's going to get a reprieve.
He's got both.
Yeah, he's got one as John. Good lad. The fight back starts.
That didn't go how I expected it to go.
Oh, I tell you what, this kid here against Jowett, he's got 2 drop-ins at black for 14-12.
He's messed it up.
He has, he's left it touching it. Useless. Looking huge. I tell you what. Is it touching? Well, that helps him. At least now we can put white somewhere semi-tight. Just come off cushion right now.
No, you know what I'd do?
I'd just play it
No.
black onto play it black
Play it
somewhere.
black. Play it black up towards up to yellow. Amazing how many people don't realise you can do that when it's touching your ball. No, but I'm just saying. No,
Well,
no.
that's
Put
alright.
black safe.
Yeah. It can go wrong though. You cannot get it safe, can't you? Sometimes.
Yeah, but you black opposite end to white.
I just think the shot he played there, he's got a decent amount of target to snooker him, and then also he's left it in jaws here, so it's a tough black anyway. Here he goes. Where's it going to finish? Is it in
Sin.
it's not in that middle, is it?
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, yeah. One good pot from this young kid, and he's 14-12 up.
Playing like a sprout, mate.
One good one, Dave. One good
against
one.
a cat 5. You said he wouldn't get past 11.
Well. Go on, get behind it. I think he's left, hasn't he? He has to have
Yeah.
left it. Oh, I tell you what, he ain't gone and played it yet.
He can't have done.
I think he can, but I think he thinks White's going to go off too and go into middle.
Are we having a knock if now?
Yes, yeah. Well, why would you do that hard if you think it's in middle?
He's definitely in middle now.
Get in the hole!
Get in there.
You called middle bank, we called up. Why did you do it that hard?
Why?
Why do it that hard?
It was a massive cut. It doesn't look like it from here.
Yes, get in there.
I think he's a bit touchy now.
A bit.
We'll leave him at that. Anyway,
This is going to go for his breaking news on commentary.
we've moved camera over. We've
Yeah.
moved over that one. Anyway, it looks like John's reds here. He's gone. Hey up, Dougie.
Ripping her to bits.
Looks like he's going to bust my treble.
Oh, you got John in trouble, did you? Darren Craig saying, "Come on, Grinder." Don't quite know what that statement means. I don't know if he's asking us to join him on an app or if he's cheering John on. I still can't work out a woman between Robbo and Kate Ringe because they're both stood there smiling away.
They're smiling, aren't they? Must have just declared it a draw. It's like, you know, it was good for pool and humanity. We will call it a draw.
Yeah, 8 hours, not a bad afternoon's knockers, I suppose.
No, that's it. D4. Some nice cues getting put on the market.
Yeah, seems quite a bit of a trade for cues and cases and stuff like that. But
Some really nice ones.
my friend's got a John Paris, and I bet he ain't been out of case for 8-10 years.
Yep. That'll be worth a bit.
Yeah, I might send him a message. I think he paid his girlfriend bought him it years and years ago for like 500 quid for his birthday. He played a bit of snooker, and yeah, and he ain't played snooker for like 8 to 10 years. So I wonder if he's still got it. Well,
Shane's done it again. He's snooking
he's
himself.
on black. All he do is get past some reds.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd certainly be worth a couple of quid.
Oh, he's not going offside rail this time. Oh. Right, this could be a turning point. If he gets on black there, 6-1, all of a sudden 5-2, it's a different game, isn't it?
Quite possibly.
Oh, I think that. Are you getting that table, Rob? Rob, you getting that table?
Are you off for it in a bit?
Yeah, I'll
Aye.
loosen arm off and maybe put a few balls. And then, these are all there for Johnny if wants to go for them. Which should be really. He's a hard player to play, is John.
Yeah, I'd struggle playing
He
against
doesn't seem to
him.
do anything fancy.
No,
He just
everything's plain and
plods balls in.
Yeah.
That's the nicest way I can say it. It's a plodder.
yeah.
And before you know it, it's like, oh, he's not black. Oh, he's dropped it in. I don't like how he's played that. Looks like he's coming back up table now. Shot John.
Talking about John Paris's, Andy Appleton's just posted his up as a bonus ball. £10 a number.
I mean, what is it? 59 is what we know, is it?
Yeah.
Are you playing Rob?
Just going to give Rob a knock.
I thought he was giving me a knock. I thought he was giving me a knock to warm me hand up.
Red in middle and just hold for the black.
Looks like he's doing more than over, doesn't it?
Yeah, well I said, looks like he's powering into this. And how can you land absolutely plumb side like that?
Well, if he over it, he has it at middle. If he under it, he's got the shot. He's on the comeback. I'm gonna go knock some balls in. Okay,
Alright,
mate.
see you in a bit.
Thank
So, Shane now leads 5 frames to 2. Is a race to 9 for a couple £100. Pardon me. So, do we start seeing John just take control of a few more frames again? I will be back shortly. I will mute the mics so the music doesn't get us shut down. Back soon. Damn. Yeah. So you've had your knock.
Yeah, it was
Good.
satisfactory.
Satisfactory knock. Still got, what, 45 minutes, I reckon, until kick-off?
Yeah, I think we'll be just past, won't we? Unless Shane wins the next two quick. You never know.
Order some food in.
What are you getting this time? That's close.
Oh, that were rolling in, that. I might get a burger from behind bar. And then
they're
see
pretty good.
about a Chinese or curry later on.
They're just a bit heavy.
Heavy.
Yeah, heavy, you know, like...
Filling.
No, not greasy, but you know, like just heavy on you.
Yeah, filling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have one before I played pub, by that way.
Well, no. No, definitely not, but...
What's Shane here, yellow?
Yeah, Shane's yellow.
That was an interesting one.
It's just, he's gone off by a bit, Shane, to be fair, from most.
As John slowed him down.
John's not played any different to how he should normally play.
Good.
See you later, Paul. See you later, Kate.
See you, Paul. Take care. Nice to see you again.
See you later.
Kate.
See you later, Neil.
Good night, Neil.
Do-do-do-do-do-do.
It's about time I played Neil. I haven't played him yet.
Well, according to the cat system, it'd be a good match.
Yeah, it should be evens. Refreshing, not give anyone a head start.
Now I realise that, like, you're gonna cat 2 or what are you? Cat 2, is it?
Neil's got two, yeah.
No, you.
Yeah.
You know, I beat you once. That's it. That's my.
No, you didn't.
Didn't I?
No, that
I
was,
thought I played him.
that was a terrible frame, but I won it.
You sure? Gonna have to
In
get.
the free man.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get an action replay on
In free man.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I won that frame. That was terrible. Yeah,
No, it
yeah,
was terrible
I had
frame.
3 goes at it, like, yeah.
We picked up after playing Jarrett's lot.
Yeah, you
Jarrett's
boys run quite well into it, didn't you? Got to the final.
Got runners up against John King's lot.
How we lost him, I don't know.
Yeah, you lost it. Yeah.
Max played great all day and lost 2 in final. I think not that I'm blaming him, but oh well, it's a good job he didn't go in because he would have had a shot on black, would he? Right, Shane.
Right, you got to take this one off.
Yeah, I think he's going to play it snooker, develop that one a little bit, and go next time. That's the shot.
Yeah,
Shot.
that's the shot.
Even if he gets himself one cushion, where's black going?
That's the only problem when you play, you know, when you play a nice cover. Well, not a nice cover, but just a basic cover. And you'll get him white like that, and you're a bit
I told you he gets lucky. I mean, I'm surprised it's not ass behind, right behind.
right behind it. Yeah.
Tell me there's a gap.
Probably.
Oh,
Oh, is it? Oh God.
I just read that, Cragsy. Yeah. I strongly disagree.
Turn the volume off.
Yeah, Mike was saying he couldn't get any volume.
Yeah, that's only because when we're not commentating, it's only got music on up here. And that's it. End up getting shut down. Use a bit of side and he's not on ball back there.
I'll tell you, he's not unsafe and he's still nicely open. Luckiest man in England.
Wait. I don't think I'd have played that shot.
I like that. That's a good shot. Well, not a good shot, but
No,
it's
because
containing.
you're the yellow nose on that clutch.
Well, yeah, but it's not so difficult
Yeah, but
because
you've only got
you've got the
one-
plant on and then the other one just drops in down to the side. There might
Yeah,
have been
but-
more about the other yellow on the right hand rail there.
It's my style play, I like my bulls.
Yep. I'll tell you, it's the luckiest man in England. I've got £1 in my pocket that says this finds an hole. He's only got 5 to go in.
What are you thinking here?
I have no idea, but he'll find one. He'll
No,
go.
you know what
He'll
I'm
go for
thinking?
double off yellow
Yeah.
into the right, left-hand middle.
No, force it in between the 2 yellows here
Yeah.
to hit the top cushion. It'll ping off that yellow and that bag.
I think he's going to double screw off that yellow. He has. Look, he's not far off it neither.
Where's the yellow? Safe.
Safe. Obviously, it's
That
not
is
safe.
absolutely
I'll
sick
tell you,
in him.
this
Fast bit,
is
sick
what it's like
bucket.
playing him.
I want that sick bucket, that's horrible.
He didn't want to be taking that then, but he had no choice.
Yeah, he had no choice to stay in frame, really, did he? Ooh, needs a little flick, but not like that. There's not real.
It looks like if he just drops this in the one not rail, he's taking a double by the look of it. Oh, that's not going to go. Could you say this is a match here if he misses black?
Misses it? Yeah.
Lovely. Well cued, John.
Oh, fuck, it scores. 7-5.
Oh, what the frame on? So John's right. Who's got one camera on today?
Yeah, just the one today, yeah.
Are you going to pop black here, is he? Is he behind black? He is. Oh, John, what you done there? Are you right? No, I'm on for this one. Oh, the squad again? Oh no, it's just a replay.
No, it's just replaying
Okay,
it.
Sterling's. Yeah, so like in that last frame, Shane was so much in control. When he played that little snooker where he brought the yellow off the cushion, he didn't have an awkward yellow left on the table, did he? And then by the time John's on black, he had 4 yellows all on 4 cushions. It's like, how does this work? And all he's done is get out of
Just
snookers
get
and
out,
leave it
so-
nicely.
Yeah. Crazy, innit? Why is Adam ringing me? Let's have a look.
I hope his car wasn't brought down.
Yeah.
Or his
Connect
missus,
him.
or maybe his missus has gone in. Is she dropping it?
Hello. Yeah, right, not too bad. You lost. Where are you? You're on foot. Hang on, I'll come outside and find you. To the which pub? Sorry. Oh, I've muted your mic by my. Oh, you're at Sunny. Right.
Sonny, right, you come over at road.
Hang on, I'll come down to you. Stay there. Right. Right.
Just tell him to walk down to traffic lights and take the little alleyway.
Take you up the Ballycree.
Yeah. Aye, you don't know. Not got money in his pocket. Well, it looks like I'm on my own now because Sam's gone to give directions to my opponent who's got lost. Hopefully it's not the first time he's lost tonight. Hey. That was a good effort from Shane there, but it was a tricky shot. Slack one before it, to be honest. It's a big for him, is this? Gets John right back in the game if he wins it. Went from 5-0 down, if he can make it to 7-all eventually. That could be telling. That's what I said, yeah. I just said that. Oh, he's played it well. Nice shot, John.
Big test for Shane.
Yeah. I just said a minute ago, if he gets, it's obviously 7-6 now. If he, yeah. 7-6, if he goes 7-7, that's been 5-0 down.
Yeah. Oh, mate. It's got 7 hours. Momentum. Kings won it. John was saying I should play this Shane.
Yeah.
It's fucking, it looks like a great fucking play. I'm shit.
Everyone else watched, he just lost. Well, it's 6-2 down last 8 frames. Shane. Yeah, he was 5-0 up. Can't quite see Scott Spencer game. Oh, 9-9 by the look of it, is it? Rob. Spencer Scott. Spence. I know. Yeah, Spencer's 9-8 up in the on the other side, on the other table against Sam Locke. How we doing? How long were you lost for? How long? Right.
Every time I went that way, it seemed to go that way. I nearly asked someone if I thought, oh, Sam's out over here.
St John's, yeah. You not been here before? Not been before?
North Yorkshire County will be moving here.
It gets hot. It gets ridiculously hot.
It's like playing at Brit.
That's always fun, isn't it? When we come.
We've got North Yorkshire in 3 weeks.
Is it?
Next.
Is it your spot?
No, Clockhouse.
I may or may not be there.
Yeah.
Barbie and that.
Yeah, Barry.
But she's gone back into hospital now. His baby's not moving properly.
Oh.
So I said, text your mum. Yeah, text you.
Thank you.
And if you're going into labour, just you'll have to break. I'll just get onto the stream and like Sam.
Yeah, just
Tell Sam.
That's saying in it, life goes on. Yes.
I've got.
Oh, yeah, it's all
Oh, shot, John. Nice shot. If John wins his frame, I think he wins the match. Downstairs. Oh, you'll get lost again.
Yeah, we'll see.
Next to the green table.
Next to the green table. Yeah, on the left.
You can go for these if you want to. I'm not sure he will. Just trying to head behind that black again.
Done me guided tour for the day.
How did he get lost finally? I know it's not exactly easy to find, but.
No, it's because on Google it tells you it's near where Sunning is.
Ah, right.
No, because it doesn't have a physical street here, does it? It's just a building.
I think it's Waterhouse Lane, isn't it? This little alleyway.
Yeah, but it's not actually on Google Maps.
Isn't it?
No. The building is, but you know, like when you're using SatNav,
Yeah.
it just tells you, oh yeah, just go on that bottom road where
Maybe a general
Sunning is.
postcode, won't it?
Yeah. It's like, oh, nice one.
Well, it's near enough.
It's near enough, and then you just go around in circles in the end. Hmm?
Suppose you have to go outside for a fact.
Oh, Jarrett, is he having his... Ah, bless him.
Oh no, he came back and won, did Jarrett? But I think they're just carrying on now. So I'm good with big Tim Henman fist pump when he put it black.
Oosh.
I thought there'd be a few more here for this tonight.
Yeah, yes. Certainly thought the same. Oh,
Dan Potter, right, and Robots are the worst people in the world.
For.
He's just put good luck York's number one winner match player.
where?
All the time, he never has that word to say.
No?
So I told him that on Monday. Every play Monday they've been like,
I just realised it's 7-6.
I know you're a lot better than me, which I couldn't give a shit for.
You, sorry.
I said, I know you're a lot better than me, which I couldn't give a shit for.
I don't think I am, but okay.
He is, exactly. There's something absolutely ridiculously good.
Will?
Dan Potter.
Oh, Pot, right, yeah.
And I just said to him, I don't give a fuck what you say.
I'm not sure. I'm not saying he would. But when I played with New York Masters, he was in front. It was like 5-2 up, and I just blitzed away from that. I'd never really met him before. But as soon as I got out of the car, I got there, he was walking into the car park as I was walking in. As I was getting out of the car, he goes, "Marty, I told you you should be my next money match." I was told you that. I don't know who you are. I was like, you don't know who someone is.
Yeah,
and
no,
you're like, oh yeah. And I was trying to get someone else involved in the conversation, so they maybe say his name at some point, so I could think, oh, it's Dan Pot. And
I can tell you someone that is be level with, in my opinion.
I'm just gonna get some.
Andrew Patrick. Or even Seb, to be fair. Seb good on his day, innit? Seb Webb.
yeah. Oh, you think you rate him that highly?
Pardon?
You rate him that highly?
Yeah, I do. He's come a long way since the last year or so.
I don't know if so at York Masters, I didn't know if he was maybe just trying to have a real millions for a big game. But I thought, well, would he throw a chance at York Masters to win York Masters to get a money game? Probably not.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Maybe it's in the back of his mind. No, I wouldn't have been.
I'm playing with a 5-star.
No?
Rating. No, what the fuck.
Oh, so that's a really good bit of form then. I should have been dead and buried that year. I mean, 6-1 down against
Shep
Shep. Yeah, I can't remember his name then.
still tells me about it.
Does he?
That's right, taking home a
I'd have been 6-4. Knew it was beating 6-4. Shot Shane. Pouch, you got.
Damn right, bro.
You're a short pouch, are you?
I'm gonna fucking use it. It's fucking massive.
You want to wait. You want to wait till it's full. If it's full in here, I'm telling you, honestly, it's unbelievable. I've got my bag here. I've got 4 t-shirts. I always bring 2. If I'm just playing a knock on a night, I'll bring a spare t-shirt. But if I'm here all day, I'll bring 4. Trying to think.
Possibly a different colour.
That's what they call me, Matty 5 t-shirts. When they stand there sweating and then they take it piss, I'm like, well, I'm still fresh as a daisy, mate. Sam's getting angry over there. Yeah. It's 8-6. Well, Shane's on hill now. Well, what's up?
Right. Then leave everything.
Tell you what, though, right, you know that Max Billy?
Who, sorry?
Max Billy.
No.
He was in that comp today, you know, where Will Dodds has gone. But yeah, I played him last week, didn't I? Played him for a start. I lost 15-14. Played for 100 quid. I'm not making excuses, but I didn't sleep.
Yeah.
Just basically just get away from me all.
Well, I was kind of
To
hoping.
drive all the way to Oslo, so
I was hoping she'd have it on Tuesday, to be honest. I needed have 4 days of no sleep.
he's offered me a game off levels.
And you were one off. Well,
Which I'm happy to
you should be a slight advantage, yeah.
more than happy to play that. But yeah, because he's got through to the winners round, he beat Alex Taylor. The guy
That's what I played, yeah.
Yeah, he beat him and then he beat the guy, Summit Farley.
I watched him play it overnight. He won, but he was behind at one point and looked like he was going to lose. I can't remember that guy's name. Was he foreign? Was he a foreign lad in a terrible shirt at Leeds? What's his name now? Foreign little short name, yeah. That's their name. Pusk or something. No. I don't know.
He said
Sharp.
if the comp had gone all the way today, it'd have been hard to beat.
Oh, they stopped.
It's hard to beat on any day, at any time. I think he's slightly better than me on paper. How fucking hard getting in it?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's not people saying. I looked at who's on his panel. Who do you think Doctor's better than me, Sam?
Do I think Johnson is better than you?
Only panel you. Leeds panel. The panel that don't like Adam Lonsmore.
How actually not? I'll have a look.
More ready for that man.
First one.
I think that's for today.
Oh no.
Whatever it is. Iron Man. Double elimination. Yeah, Ed lost him. Lost the first one, I think. And then he won 7-0.
The timing has worked out pretty well. You walking
Until
in?
11 o'clock tomorrow morning. So
That's when you've got to.
that's when car runs out.
When what does, sorry?
Car runs out.
Oh, why did you put that much in? It's 3 after 6.
No, 3 quid in.
Where did you go? Back at Sunning.
North Street. Literally round this corner when you come out,
Yeah.
straight down, straight down.
Tip roundabout.
Oh, where the actual big car park.
It's 3 after 6.
Rob North Street car park.
It's 3 after 6.
Turn it on. I paid 3. Better than 5.60 like you said.
Sure.
And I couldn't find it.
Better than John. He came up a week for a comp. And 2 lads he drove through said, "Oh, we'll pay for car parking." Gone to Finn, come back with a ticket, he puts it in the window. He said, "Oh, it's free from 6, so just get till 6 o'clock." It had been another quid. They didn't know at the time, but the ticket said 5.42, something like that. It was just short, but for the extra 18 minutes, would have been another quid. And they're like, "Oh no, we won't get a ticket." Come back, got a ticket at 10 to. So he sat here all day, goes out 11:30 at night, goes to cast a fucking ticket on one screen.
Oh dear.
Cheers, lads.
What's through that ball?
Snooker table.
Oh, super.
Just one.
Does that have air colour?
No. There's a big fan here. Where is it? It's there. Literally. Adam, 3-man team event. There was 45 players here in this room. Never mind who else was here watching that. And it was hot, wasn't it? It was bad.
Maybe about 6 weeks. To be fair, I got it off Doddsy because he bought a different one. Tried it, it works. But I feel more comfortable without it, but it starts to get sticky.
I've cut fingers. Still
Yeah, it's a fingerless one.
yeah.
Right, what's happening here? 6-8, and John looks like he's about to make it 8-7. This is going up way, this.
Time start 12.
Tricky Black. He might have to take a double on this. Yog, oh, he's long gone.
Right, on a serious note,
No, it did.
the actual.
What? Yes.
Well, that's a no. Well, what did he do? Where's he gone? Is he fell down the ditch or what?
What's the question? Did he shag a lesbian?
That's what he said.
Congrats to Shane beating John King 9 frames to 6. Next up, it's going to be the main event. Matty Gardner against Adam Myerscough. Race to 18 for a bit of money. Not much money, but just a little bit of money. Right, we'll be back soon. Everything will be on the news stream.